What are the agricultural uses of antibiotics?
Antibiotics are sprayed onto fruit trees and other food-bearing plants to control disease. In addition, antibiotics are added to feedstocks to prevent disease and improve the growth rate among food-producing animals.
Which woods are used for telephone poles?
The principal woods used for telephone poles are southern pine, Douglas fir, western red cedar, and lodgepole pine. Ponderosa pine, red pine, jack pine, northern white cedar, and western larch are also used.
What is meant by the modern era of genetics?
Mendel's work was really not appreciated until advances in cytology enabled scientists to better study cells. In 1900, Hugo de Vries, 1848–1935, of Holland, Karl Correns, 1864–1933, of Germany, and Erich von Tschirmach, 1871–1962, of Austria examined Mendel's original 1866 paper and repeated the experiments. In the following years chromosomes were discovered as discrete structures within the nucleus of a cell. In 1917 Thomas Hunt Morgan, 1866–1945, a fruit fly geneticist at Columbia University, extended Mendel's findings to the structure and function of chromosomes. This and subsequent findings in the 1950s were the beginning of the modern era of genetics.
Can horses really do math?
At the end of the 19th century, a performing horse in Germany known as Clever, or Kluge, Hans was able to tap out the answers to mathematical problems written on a chalkboard. Hans would use his right forefoot to indicate the single digits, 0 to 9, and his left forefoot for the tens place, 10, 20, 30, etc. His amazing performances continued for a number of years until the psychologist Oscar Pfungst, 1874–1932, was able to show that Hans was simply counting until his questioner indicated subconsciously that Hans had reached the correct sum, even though the horse was not actually performing calculations. His ability to observe and respond to subtle changes in human behavior is still quite noteworthy.
Do bacteria all have the same shape?
Bacteria have three main shapes: spherical, rod-shaped, and spiral. Spherical bacteria, known as cocci, occur singularly in some species and as groups in other species. Cocci have the ability to stick together and form a pair, diplococci, when they stick together in long chains. They are called streptococci. Irregularly shaped clumps or clusters of bacteria are called staphylococci. Rod-shaped bacteria, called bacilli, occur as single rods or as long chains of rods. Spiral or helical-shaped bacteria are called spirilla.
Do all cells require oxygen?
Not all cells require oxygen. There are cells that use a metabolic pathway called fermentation to produce energy. Examples of anaerobic, non-oxygen dependent organisms include yeast and bacteria that are able to thrive in an environment with low levels of oxygen. However, the majority of organisms are aerobic. Oxygen dependent, because of the high ATP yield that oxygen provides. ATP is the main energy source for cells. Under some circumstances, oxygen-dependent cells can harvest energy from fermentation for short periods of time. However, this shortcut eventually results in a buildup of a lactic acid, a toxic waste product, and produces little ATP.
What is delayed implantation?
Delayed implantation is a phenomenon that lengthens the gestation period of many mammals. The blastocyst remains dormant while its implantation in the uterine wall is postponed for a period of time lasting from a few weeks to several months. Many mammals, including bears, seals, weasels, badgers, bats, and some deer, use this phenomenon to extend their gestation period through delayed implantation so they give birth at the time of year that offers the best chance of survival for their young.
What is Darwinian medicine?
Darwinian medicine is the application of Darwinian principles. Descent with modification via natural selection, to the disease process. The purpose of the study of medicine from a Darwinian point of view is not to determine who is fittest or healthiest, but instead to determine the evolutionary underpinnings of why. As such highly adapted organisms, we as a species are still prone to diseases like atherosclerosis, hardening of the blood vessels, nearsightedness, or cancer.
What is a trans fat?
The term trans fat refers to the arrangement of hydrogen atoms around the carbon backbone of the fatty acid. A trans fatty acid is a molecule that has a carbon backbone with hydrogen atoms attached in a manner that is not normally found in nature. Most naturally occurring fatty acids have their hydrogen arranged in the cis form. In trans fats, some of these hydrogens are attached on opposite sides of the fatty acid 20 molecule in what is known as a trans, as opposed to cis, formation.
What is the difference between ectotherms and endotherms?
Ectotherms, also known as cold-blooded animals, warm their bodies by absorbing heat from their surroundings. These animals have large variations in normal body temperature due to their changing environment. Most invertebrates, fishes, reptiles, and amphibians are ectotherms. The body temperature of endotherms, also known as warm-blooded animals, depends on the heat produced by the animal's metabolism. Mammals, birds, some fishes, and some insects are endotherms. Their normal body temperature is fairly constant even when there are vast differences in the temperature of their environment.
Why don't organisms that produce toxins die during the synthesis of toxic material?
Organisms produce toxins as a defense mechanism, therefore. Most organisms are immune to their own toxins as well as that of other members of the same species. Toxins are a cell product packaged into a membranous sac known as a vesicle. The contents of the vesicle are secreted into the salivary gland. Skin surface, or fangs of the organism during the process of exocytosis. The toxin is then ingested, or absorbed by other organisms, often a predator. Each toxin creates a specific effect. For example, the snake venom known as bungarotoxin deactivates acetylcholine receptors on muscles. Since it is secreted externally, it is unlikely that the snake producing the toxin would be affected.
What conditions are necessary for seed germination?
Seeds remain dormant until the optimum conditions of temperature, oxygen, and moisture are available for germination and further development. In addition to these external factors, some seeds undergo a series of enzymatic and biochemical changes prior to germination.
What are functional groups?
There are numerous patterns of atoms and bonds that are found frequently in organic compounds. These configurations of atoms are called functional groups, as each has specific, predictable properties. For example, an amino acid contains both an amino and a carboxyl, while alcohols all have a hydroxyl group. This group results in the solubility of alcohol in water.
What is adaptive radiation?
As populations move into new environments and adapt to those local conditions, there is an increase in diversity. This splitting creates a divergence from the original population. When diagrammed on paper, the new populations appear to be radiating outward from the original like the spokes of a wheel. An iguana in the Galapagos Islands. Because island populations tend to be reproductively isolated from the mainland, they are more likely to demonstrate adaptations that are particular to that island's ecology.
What are the four major groups of plants?
Plants are divided into phyla based on whether they are vascular, containing vascular tissue consisting of cells joined into tubes that transport water and nutrients, or non-vascular. The phyla of vascular plants are then further divided into seedless plants and those that contain seeds. Plants with seeds are divided into flowering and non-flowering groups. Non-vascular plants have traditionally been called bryophytes. Because bryophytes lack a system for conducting water and nutrients, they are restricted in size and live in moist areas close to the ground. Examples of bryophytes are mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. Examples of seedless, vascular plants are ferns, horsetails, and club mosses. The conifers, which are cone-bearing, are seed-bearing, non-flowering vascular plants. The majority of plants are seed-bearing, flowering, vascular plants known as angiosperms.
What are nonspecific defenses?
Nonspecific defenses do not differentiate between various invaders. Barriers such as skin, hide, and the mucous membrane lining the respiratory and digestive tracts. Phagocytic white blood cells, and chemicals are nonspecific defenses. The nonspecific defenses are the first to respond to a foreign substance in the body.
What members of Cnidaria are economically important?
Reef-building corals are among the most important members of Cnidaria. Coral reefs are among the most productive of all ecosystems. They are large formations of calcium carbonate. Limestone, in tropical seas laid down by living organisms over thousands of years. Fishes and other animals associated with reefs provide an important source of food for humans. And reefs serve as tourist attractions. Many terrestrial organisms also benefit from coral reefs, which form and maintain the foundation of thousands of islands. By providing a barrier against waves, reefs also protect shorelines against storms and erosion.
Is antibiotic resistance an evolutionary trend?
Antibiotic resistance is the loss of susceptibility in bacteria to drugs like penicillin and erythromycin. The reason that it is interesting from an evolutionary perspective is that it demonstrates evolution happening in real time, that is, within a period easily observable by humans. The variation in response to antibiotics within a population of bacteria is similar to that described by Darwin and Wallace. When some bacterial cells survive after an incomplete course of antibiotic treatment, they form the basis for a new drug-resistant strain. What is troubling, however, is that different types of bacteria can actually share the genes that make them drug-resistant, so that this ability is becoming more prevalent among different strains of disease-causing organisms.
How does an antibiotic affect protein synthesis?
Antibiotics can slow or shut down protein synthesis in bacteria. There are about 160 known antibiotics, and each acts differently and selectively, depending on the type of bacterial infection. As an example, streptomycin inhibits initiation of protein synthesis by interfering with final formation of the two subunits of a bacterial ribosome.
What is the lion hypothesis?
The Lyon hypothesis refers directly to a bar body. It was proposed by Mary Lyon, 1925, in 1961 that a bar body is actually an inactivated X chromosome. According to this hypothesis, female mammals sequester one X chromosome in each of their cells during the early stages of development. This folded chromosome becomes the dark body of Barr's observation. This means that both males and females rely on the information from only a single X chromosome. Therefore, it is only one X chromosome that provides genetic information in both males and females.
Is there a relationship between the size of the root system and the size of the shoot system?
Growing plants maintain a balance between the size of the root system, the surface area available for the absorption of water and minerals, and the shoot system, the photosynthesizing surface. The total water and mineral absorbing surface area in young seedlings usually far exceeds the photosynthesizing surface area. As the plant ages, the root-to-shoot ratio decreases. Additionally, if the root system is damaged, reducing the water and mineral absorbing surface area, shoot growth is reduced by lack of water, minerals, and root-produced hormones. Similarly, reducing the size of the shoot system limits root growth by decreasing the availability of carbohydrates and shoot-produced hormones to the roots.
Do animals have color vision?
Most reptiles, fishes, insects, and birds appear to have a well-developed color sense. Most mammals are colorblind. Apes and monkeys have the ability to tell colors apart. Dogs and cats seem to be colorblind and only see shades of black, white, and gray.
How are pearls created?
Pearls are formed in saltwater oysters and freshwater clams. There is a curtain-like tissue called the mantle within the body of these mollusks. Certain cells on the side of the mantle toward the shell secrete nacre, also known as mother of pearl, during a specific stage of the shell building process. A pearl is the result of an oyster's reaction to a foreign body, such as a piece of sand or a parasite, within the oyster's shell. The oyster neutralizes the invader by secreting thin layers of nacre around the foreign body, eventually building it into a pearl. The thin layers are alternately composed of calcium carbonate, argonite, and conchiolin. Irritants intentionally placed within an oyster result in the production of what is called cultured pearls.
What molecules are most important to living organisms?
Four molecules are referred to as bioorganic because they are essential to living organisms and contain carbon. Nucleic acids, proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. These molecules are all large, and they are formed by a specific type of smaller molecule, known as a monomer.
How does a dominant trait differ from a recessive trait?
A dominant trait is one that is expressed whenever present, either as a homozygous genotype, DD, or a heterozygous one, DD. In other words, dominance means that a heterozygote carrying only one copy of the dominant allele will display the dominant phenotype. The term dominant does not infer that this is more normal or common than a recessive trait. In contrast, recessive phenotypes always result from a genotype in which alleles are alike. Recessive traits seem to be more common in a population than dominant traits. Sometimes an allele is a no-signal message, meaning that no functional polypeptide will be made from its expression.
What is the best soil pH for growing plants?
Nutrients such as phosphorus, calcium, potassium, and magnesium are most available to plants when the soil pH is between 6.0 and 7.5. Under highly acidic, low pH conditions, these nutrients become insoluble and relatively unavailable for uptake by plants. However, some plants such as rhododendrons grow better in acidic soils. High soil pH can also decrease the availability of nutrients. If the soil is more alkaline than pH 8, phosphorus, iron, and many trace elements become insoluble and unavailable for plant uptake.
What features of reptiles enabled them to become true land vertebrates?
Legs were arranged to support the body's weight more effectively than in amphibians, allowing reptile bodies to be larger and to run. Reptilian lungs were more developed with a greatly increased surface area for gas exchange than the sac-like lungs of amphibians. The three-chambered heart of reptiles was more efficient than the amphibian heart. In addition, the skin was covered with hard, dry scales to minimize water loss. However, the most important evolutionary adaptation was the amniotic egg, in which an embryo could survive and develop on land. The eggs were surrounded by a protective shell that prevented the developing embryo from drying out.
What is the role of the male bee?
Their job is to fertilize the new queens.
How many species of fungi are plant pathogens?
More than 8,000 species of fungi cause disease in plants. Most diseases found among both cultivated and wild plants are caused by fungi. Some pathogenic fungi grow and multiply in their host plants. Others grow and multiply on dead organic matter and host plants. Fungi that are pathogenic to plants can occur below the soil surface. At the soil surface, and throughout the body of a plant. Fungi are responsible for leaf spots, blights, rusts, smuts, mildews, cankers, scabs, fruit rots, galls, wilts, tree diebacks and declines, as well as root, stem, and seed rots.
What is gene therapy?
Gene therapy involves replacement of an abnormal disease-causing gene with a normal gene. The normal gene is delivered to target cells using a vector, which is usually a virus that has been genetically engineered to carry human DNA. The virus genome is altered to remove disease-causing genes and insert therapeutic genes. Target cells are infected with the virus. The virus then integrates its genetically altered material containing the human gene into the target cell, where it should produce a functional protein product.
How do animals know when it is time to migrate?
although there are several cues that animals could use to stimulate migration. The most consistent year after year would be the change in duration of daylight, also known as photoperiodism. Although it has been suggested that temperature changes might also play a role. Light is still the best predictor of migratory onset.
What is unusual about the teeth of sharks?
Sharks were among the first vertebrates to develop teeth. The teeth are not set into the jaw but rather sit atop it. They are not firmly anchored and are easily lost. The teeth are arranged in 6 to 20 rows, with the ones in front doing the biting and cutting. Behind these teeth, others grow. When a tooth breaks or is worn down, a replacement moves forward. One shark may eventually develop and use more than 20,000 teeth in a lifetime.
What was the historical significance of hemp?
During the early years of colonial America, hemp, Agave cisalina, was as common as cotton is now. It was an easy crop to grow, requiring little water, no fertilizers, and no pesticides. The fabric looks and feels like linen. It was used for uniforms of soldiers, paper. The first two drafts of the Declaration of Independence were written on hemp paper, and an all-purpose fabric. Betsy Ross's flag was made of red, white, and blue hemp.
What are gymnosperms and which plants are included in this group?
Gymnosperms, from the Greek terms gymnos, which means naked, and sperma, meaning seed, produce seeds that are totally exposed or borne on the scales of cones. The four phyla of gymnosperms are, Coniferophyta, conifers including pine, spruce, hemlock and fir. Ginkgophyta, consisting of one species, the ginkgo or maidenhair tree, Cycladophyta. The cycads or ornamental plants, and Nidophyta, a collection of very unusual vines and trees.
How does the use of antibiotics in animal feed promote animal growth?
Farmers introduced the use of antibiotics to animal feed more than 40 years ago. The main reason for antibiotic use was, and continues to be, to keep the animals healthy. Animals are often kept closely together in pens, a condition that promotes the spread of bacterial infections. The use of antibiotics inhibited the incidence and spread of infection among livestock. An unplanned side effect of this treatment was accelerated animal growth. Scientists believe antibiotics suppress the intestinal bacteria Clostridium perfringens, which produces toxins that may retard animal growth. After this discovery, farmers began to give their animals antibiotics to promote weight gain as well as to treat infection.
What effect does aspirin have on enzymes?
Aspirin is probably the most common over-the-counter medication. Aspirin blocks the production of cyclooxygenase, COX, enzymes. COX-1 and COX-2 are two important enzymes with different functions. COX-1 catalyzes the biosynthesis of hormones important in maintaining the stomach lining. COX-2 catalyzes the biosynthesis of chemicals that promote inflammation, fever, and pain when an injury occurs. The positive effects of aspirin, pain and inflammation reduction, are due to the blocking of COX-2 enzymes. However, the negative aspects of aspirin, stomach problems, are due to the blocking of COX-1 enzymes.
What is the electromagnetic spectrum?
The electromagnetic spectrum is the range of wavelengths. It ranges from gamma rays with very short wavelengths, 10 to 5, and high energy through radio waves with longer wavelengths, 103 meters, and less energy. Visible light, seen as color, occurs between 380 and 750. Ultraviolet light has a shorter wavelength, while infrared light has a greater wavelength.
How quickly do bacteria reproduce?
In a favorable environment, bacteria can reproduce very rapidly. Favorable circumstances include laboratory cultures or the natural habitat. For example, under optimal conditions, Escherichia coli can divide every 20 minutes. A laboratory culture started with a single cell can produce a colony of 107 to 108 bacteria in about 12 hours.
What is the structure of the plasma membrane?
The plasma membrane is a thin membrane that surrounds and defines the boundaries all living cells. It consists of a double layer, bilayer, of phospholipids with various proteins attached to or embedded in it.
What is pith?
Pith is the ground tissue, consisting usually of parenchyma. In the center of the root or stem within the vascular cylinder.
What is the only four-horned animal in the world?
The four-horned antelope, Tetracerus quadricornis, is a native of central India. The males have two short horns, usually 4 in, 10 centimeters, in length, between their ears. And an even shorter pair, 1 to 2 in, 2.5 to 5 centimeters, long, between the brow ridges over their eyes. Not all males have 4 horns. And in some the second pair eventually falls off. The females have no horns at all.
Who was the first scientist to be associated with plant tissue culture?
Tissue culture is a technique for growing fragments of plants in an artificial medium. The basis for tissue culture was proposed in 1902 by the German botanist Gottlieb Haberlandt. 1854 to 1945, who suggested that plant cells were totipotent. In this proposal, every cell has the same genes and the same genetic potential to make all cells other cell types. Botanists began testing Haberlandt's idea, and the proof of totipotency would be the regeneration of an entire plant from one or a few non-zygotic cells. The earliest experiments failed. Cultured cells remained alive for a short time but did not divide and soon died.
What are the advantages of seed dormancy?
The time during which a seed is dormant. When growth and development do not occur, allows for the dispersal of seeds. The plant can send its seeds into new environments. Dormancy assures survival of the plant since germination does not occur until conditions are favorable for plant growth.
What is spectroscopy?
Spectroscopy includes a range of techniques to study the composition, structure, and bonding of elements and compounds. The different methods of spectroscopy use different wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum to study atoms, molecules, ions, and the bonding between them.
What are some vertebrate endocrine glands and their hormones?
There are 10 major endocrine glands in vertebrates.
Does exercise increase the number of muscle cells?
Exercise does not increase the number of muscle cells. Adult animals have a fixed number of skeletal muscle cells. Exercise, however, does enlarge existing skeletal muscle cells.
Can genetic engineering be used to save endangered species?
as endangered species disappear from natural habitats and are only found in zoos. Researchers are looking for ways to conserve these species. Using cryopreservation, the Zoological Society of San Diego has created a frozen zoo that stores viable cell lines from more than 3,200 individual mammals, birds, and reptiles, representing 355 species and subspecies. Researchers maintain that there should still be continued efforts to preserve species in their natural habitats. But by preserving and studying animal DNA, scientists can learn genetic aspects crucial to the species' survival.
Why do the swallows return to Capistrano?
As part of their annual migration, thousands of swallows arrive each year. About March 19 at the San Juan Capistrano mission in San Juan, California. They depart around October 23 for their 6,000 miles 9,656 kilometers flight to Goya, Argentina. March 19 and October 23 are the feast days for Saints Joseph and San Juan, respectively.
What is the relationship between telomeres and aging?
In many cells there appears to be an optimal number of repeats at the telomeres. Normal telomere length is restored by the enzyme telomerase. Studies have shown that when the telomerase gene is silenced, there is progressive shortening of telomeres as cells divide. Germline and some stem cells express the telomerase gene, but somatic cells do not express the gene and therefore show telomere shortening with each cell division. Thus, it may be possible to slow body aging by slowing cellular senescence. This can be achieved by maintaining the activity of the telomerase gene.
What is a hybrid?
A hybrid is produced as the offspring of two true breeding organisms of different strains, AAXA. If the hybrids, AA, are then mated, the result is a hybrid cross.
What is unique about the marine iguanas of the Galapagos?
The marine iguanas of the Galapagos show evidence of unique behavioral adaptations to their environment. They are strictly vegetarian and are able to swim. In effect, they are the cows of the Galapagos, taking on the role of primary consumers.
How can you tell male and female lobsters apart?
The differences between male and female lobsters can only be seen when they are turned on their backs. In the male lobster, the two swimmerets, forked appendages used for swimming, nearest the carapace. The solid shell are hard, sharp, and bony. In the female the same swimmerets are soft and feathery. The female also has a receptacle that appears as a shield wedged between the third pair of walking legs. During mating the male deposits sperm into this receptacle, where it remains for as long as several months until the female uses it to fertilize her eggs as they are laid.
What are mitochondria?
A mitochondrion, singular, is a self-replicating, double-membraned body found in the cytoplasm of all eukaryotic cells. The outer membrane of a mitochondrion is smooth, while the inner membrane is folded into numerous layers that are called cristae. Mitochondria are the location for much of the metabolism necessary for protein synthesis and the production of both ATP and lipids.
What is a gene patent?
A gene patent is a patent issued for a specific DNA sequence of a specific organism. It is common for companies to obtain patents for genes important to medicine and agriculture.
How can genes be silenced?
Genes can be silenced either by preventing their transcription or by interference with their transcript. Gene silencing is a method by which researchers can study gene expression.
Are mental disorders inherited?
Most mental disorders have a genetic component. A study on a large family in 1993 identified a link between a particular type of mental retardation, which included frequent aggressive and violent outbursts, with a region on the short arm of the X chromosome in some of the males. This is one of the few cases in which there appears to be a direct correlation between a single gene defect and a particular type of mental disorder.
What is the most primitive group of animals?
Sponges, phylum Porifera, from the Latin terms porus, meaning pore, and fera, meaning bearing, represent the most primitive animals. These organisms are aggregates of specialized cells without true tissues or organs, with little differentiation and integration, and with no body symmetry. A sponge's body is perforated by holes that lead to an inner water chamber. Sponges pump water through those pores and expel it through a large opening at the top of the chamber. While water is passing through the body, nutrients are engulfed. Oxygen is absorbed, and waste is eliminated. Sponges are distinctive in possessing choanocytes, special flagellated cells whose beating drives water. through the body cavity and that characterize them as suspension feeders, also known as filter feeders.
What are the functions of stems?
The four main functions of stems are, 1. To support leaves, 2. Produce carbohydrates, 3. Store materials such as water and starch, and 4. Transport water and solutes between roots and leaves. Stems provide the link between the water and dissolved nutrients of the soil and the leaves.
What is an intron?
An intron is the part of the RNA transcript that is removed by the spliceosome and therefore remains in the nucleus.
What are adventitious roots?
Adventitious roots, from the Latin term adventitious, meaning not belonging to, are roots that form on organs other than roots, such as a leaf or stem. In some plants, adventitious roots are a means of vegetative propagation, such as for raspberries, apples, and cabbage.
What is an allele?
An allele is an alternative form of a gene. There are usually two alleles for each gene, although the number may vary from one trait to another. Each individual inherits one allele from the mother and one from the father. Alleles for a trait are located on corresponding loci on each homologous chromosome.
Can people have missing or extra chromosomes?
Yes, people can live with this chromosomal abnormality. Depending on which chromosomes are copied or missing. Examples of these conditions include Down syndrome, an extra copy of chromosome 21, and Turner syndrome. A female with only one X chromosome, both of which can result in healthy babies. Conversely, almost 1% of all conceptions are triploid. 3 copies of each chromosome, but over 99% of these die before birth.
How do bacterial and fungal spores differ?
The main purpose of bacterial spores, known as endospores, is to protect bacterial cells so they can survive extreme, harsh conditions. Fungi reproduce both sexually and asexually through the formation of spores. Asexual spores are formed by the hyphae of one organism. The organisms that form from these spores are identical to their parents. Sexual spores result from the fusion of nuclei from two strains of the same species of fungus. Organisms from sexual spores derive characteristics from each parent.
What are sex chromosomes?
Sex, X and Y in mammals, chromosomes are the non-matching pair. The Y chromosome, found only in males, has the sex-determining gene, SRY. The SRY determines whether or not an individual will develop testes and produce appreciable quantities of testosterone, the hormone that generates male characteristics. There is no known correlate gene on the X chromosome for the formation of ovaries. Therefore, it is the absence of the Y chromosome that determines a female.
What are some diseases associated with inadequate dietary intake of protein?
There are several diseases associated with insufficient protein intake. Marasmus, a condition caused by chronic malnutrition, occurs most often among children 6 to 18 months of age. The arms and legs of children with marasmus are described as having a matchstick-like appearance. Kwashiorkor, another disease caused by malnutrition, derives its name from a Ghanaian phrase that describes the change a firstborn child often undergoes when a second child is born. Kwashiorkor sufferers typically consume enough calories but are protein deficient, usually a result of being weaned at too early an age. Kwashiorkor causes an enlargement of the liver and a buildup of fluid within the body, particularly in the belly. Children with kwashiorkor tend to have plump-looking limbs and distended bellies. But the deceptive enlargement is caused by swelling, not body fat.
How did the protist Phytophthora infestans influence Irish history?
Phytophthora infestans, one of the potato's most lethal pathogens, causes the late blight of potato disease. This pathogen was responsible for the Irish potato famine of 1845 to 1849. P. Infestans causes the leaves and stem of the potato plant to decay, eventually causing the tuber to stop growing. In addition, the tubers are attacked by the pathogen and rot. It has been estimated that 1.5 million Irish people emigrated from their country and moved to various parts of the world, but most immigrated to the United States. An estimated 400,000 people perished during the famine due to malnutrition.
What colored pigments are produced by lichens?
Lichens are often strikingly colored because of pigments that play a role in protecting the photosynthetic partner from the destructive action of the sun's rays. These pigments can be extracted from lichens and used as natural dyes. The traditional method of manufacturing Scotland's famous tweeds makes use of fungal dyes. Synthetic dyes are now commonly used. Orchil, used to dye woolens, is a pigment produced specifically by lichens. The lichen Rosella tincturea is used to produce litmus, a widely used acid-base indicator.
Are there differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic ribosomes?
Prokaryotic and eukaryotic ribosomes resemble each other structurally, but they are not identical. Prokaryotic ribosomes are smaller in size, contain fewer proteins, have smaller RNA molecules, and are sensitive to different inhibitors of protein synthesis.
How did Lysenko affect genetics in the Soviet Union?
Trofim Lysenko, 1889 to 1976, was a dominant force in biology and agriculture in the Soviet Union from 1937 to 1964. Lysenko was a follower of Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. 1744 to 1829, who believed that environmental experiences could change genetic inheritance. Lysenko sought to manipulate the environment in the hopes that this would increase agricultural productivity. By the time Lysenko had fallen out of favor, Soviet agricultural productivity had, in fact, actually decreased significantly, failing to keep pace with the advances of other developed countries.
How do some cells, such as those found in nails and horns, change shape and become hard?
All of the surface cells of the body, except those in eyes, contain a molecule called keratin, a fibrous protein that is particularly well suited to withstand abrasions. Certain cells, like those of the nails and hair, have increased amounts of keratin that provide extra strength, helping them maintain their shape. Whether it is in the claws on the toes of your cat, the horns on the head of your favorite cow, or the 5 million hairs that cover your body, keratin strengthens and protects organisms from everyday wear and tear.
Who was the first individual to find the gene for breast cancer?
Mary Claire King, 1946, determined that in 5 to 10% of those women with breast cancer, the cancer is the result of a mutation of a gene on chromosome 17, the BRCA1, breast cancer 1. The BRCA1 gene is a tumor suppressor gene and is also linked to ovarian cancer. Subsequently, other researchers were able to clone the gene and pinpoint its exact location on chromosome 17.
Why are some species more commonly used for genetic studies than others?
Species with a relatively small genome, with a short generation time from seed to seed, and that are adaptable to living in captivity are appealing as experimental organisms. Even though many of these species bear little physical resemblance to humans, they do share part of our genome and so can answer some of the questions we have about genetic inheritance and gene expression.
What is the difference between porpoises and dolphins?
Marine dolphins, family Delphinidae, and porpoises, family Phocinidae, together comprise about 40 species. The chief differences between dolphins and porpoises occur in the snout and teeth. True dolphins have a beak-like snout and cone-shaped teeth. True porpoises have a rounded snout and flat or spade-shaped teeth.
What are the component molecules of DNA?
The full name of DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, with the nucleic part coming from the location of DNA in the nuclei of eukaryotic cells. DNA is actually a polymer, long strand, of nucleotides. A nucleotide has three component parts: a phosphate group, a 5-carbon sugar, deoxyribose, and a nitrogen base. If you visualize DNA as a ladder, the sides of the ladder are made of the phosphate and deoxyribose molecules, and the rungs are made of two different nitrogen bases. The nitrogen bases are the crucial part of the molecule with regard to genes. Specific sequences of nitrogen bases make up a gene.
What is the role of plasmids?
Plasmids are small, circular molecules of DNA containing genetic information. They contain about 2% of the genetic information of a cell and are separate from chromosomes. Although plasmids are not essential to the life of a bacterium, they determine a cell's resistance to antibiotics, commonly referred to as the R factor or resistance factor. Certain plasmids allow the transfer of genetic material, which is essential in genetic engineering.
What is eutrophication?
Eutrophication is a process in which the supply of plant nutrients in a lake or pond is increased. In time, the result of natural eutrophication may be dry land where water once flowed, caused by plant overgrowth. Natural fertilizers, washed from the soil, result in an accelerated growth of plants, producing overcrowding. As the plants die off, the dead and decaying vegetation depletes the lake oxygen supply, causing fish to die. The accumulated dead plant and animal material eventually changes a deep lake to a shallow one, then to a swamp, and finally it becomes dry land. While the process of eutrophication is a natural one, it has been accelerated enormously by human activities. Fertilizers from farms, sewage, industrial wastes, and some detergents all contribute to the problem.
Which is more common, endomycorrhiza or ectomycorrhiza?
Both endomycorrhiza and ectomycorrhiza have the ability to be mycorrhizal fungi. In endomycorrhiza, the hyphae of the fungus penetrate the outer cells of the plant root and extend into the surrounding soil. In ectomycorrhiza, the hyphae surround but do not penetrate the roots. Endomycorrhiza are much more common than ectomycorrhiza. The fungal component of endomycorrhiza is a zygomycete. While only about 30 species of zygomycetes are known to be involved in endomycorrhizal relationships, the zygomycetes are associated with more than 200,000 species of plants. Basidiomycetes are the most common fungal component of ectomycorrhiza. Although some ascomycetes also form ectomycorrhizal relationships, more species of fungi are involved in ectomycorrhiza, at least 5,000. But most are only associated with a single species of plant. Furthermore, the total number of plants involved in ectomycorrhiza is limited to a few thousand.
How is the peripheral nervous system organized in vertebrates?
There are two divisions to the peripheral nervous system, the sensory division and the motor division. The sensory division has two sets of neurons. One set, from the eyes, ears, and other external sense organs, brings in information about the outside environment, while the other set supplies the central nervous system with information about the body itself, such as the acidity of the blood. The motor division includes the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system carries signals to skeletal muscles and skin, mostly in response to external stimuli. It controls voluntary actions. The neurons of the autonomic nervous system are involuntary. This latter system is further divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. The sympathetic division prepares the body for intense activities. It is responsible for the fight or flight response. The parasympathetic division, or housekeeper system, is involved in all responses associated with a relaxed state such as digestion.
What important scientific discoveries were made using X-ray diffraction?
In 1951 the protein A helix was discovered by Linus Pauling, 1901 to 1994. X-ray diffraction was used to reveal the double helix structure of DNA in 1953 by Maurice Wilkins. 1916, Francis Crick, 1916–2004, Rosalind Franklin, 1920–1958, and James Watson, 1928. Dorothy Mary Crowfoot Hodgkin, 1901–1994. Used the technique to determine the structure of vitamin B12 in 1956.
What is dietary fiber?
Dietary fiber is a type of carbohydrate that cannot be broken down by digestive enzymes. Because of this, the fiber passes through the digestive tract more quickly, aiding in elimination. The term dietary fiber includes the cellulose found in plant cell walls and the chitin that makes up the support tissues of fungi, mushrooms, crustaceans, and insects.
Why don't all types of cancers respond the same way to anti-cancer drugs?
The purpose of most anti-cancer drugs is to target the overproduction of malignant cells. Different types of cancers arise from different types of tissue. Since every tissue is made up of cells specialized for a certain function, it is not surprising that different forms of cancers will have different responses to the same drug. For example, a drug that targets the overproduction of liver cells, which are adapted to filtering and monitoring the blood supply, might have little effect on nerve cells that specialize in carrying messages.
What is meant by a genetic fingerprint?
Just as a real fingerprint is used to identify people individually, a genetic or DNA fingerprint is a unique pattern of DNA sequences for each individual.
What is a VNTR?
VNTR refers to variable number of tandem repeats, which is a kind of molecular marker that contains sequences of DNA that have end-to-end repeats of different short DNA sequences. When the repeating unit is 2 to 4 base pairs long, it is called an STR, short tandem repeat. And when the repeating unit is 2 to 30 base pairs long, it is called a VNTR. An example of a VNTR is GAT, which is 4 tandem repeats of the sequence GGAT. In addition, VNTRs are highly variable regions, and thus there may be many alleles. Gene variations, at many loci, physical location of a gene on a chromosome. VNTRs were discovered by Alec Jeffreys, 1950, and colleagues as they were working on the basics of DNA fingerprinting.